developers who are not yet familiar with many options Git offers to version code and solve merge conflicts. We'll be using Visualizer 8.x and the Git command line. So today's session will cover how to set up Git repo from a Visualizer project. This is one. The second point is common pitfalls specific to Visualizer projects. Third one would be what must be versioned and what can be ignored. And the fourth one is basic Git tips and tricks, which are especially useful for Visualizer projects. We'll cover more things, but then just to quickly finish it off, now let me welcome Miguel Angel Fernandez. He is the Global Tech Lead at Kony and the presenter of our today's session. We also have with us Senior Architect Paul Sinkel, who is also going to answer all your questions coming in the Q&A panel. So I request you all to please put your questions in Q&A panel and not to the chat box. We'll answer you as and when that is possible. We are also recording this webinar and we'll be posting it in the articles area on Basecamp. So you can go to Basecamp, go to articles and see that there. We also have a couple of polls that we are going to run during the event. So make sure you participate in those polls and keep it interactive. So let's get the presentation going. Over to you, Miguel.
Thank you, Tanmay. Welcome everyone. I hope you're prepared to see a couple of few tricks that I have up my sleeve. The presentation today, or the motivation for this presentation, is for a very long time I've felt that there was a bit of a vacuum in terms of best practices for versioning Visualizer projects. And as a tech lead, I've gathered this concern from the field over the 3 years that I've been with the company. So hopefully by now I've gathered enough tips and tricks in my arsenal to make it worth your while for at least an hour. So I see a few people complaining that there's no audio. Can you guys hear me? Can everybody hear me?
We had someone use WebEx to call them back, and that seemed to help, Miguel. So if you're having trouble hearing, use the phone or have WebEx call you back.
Okay. No, I'm fine. It's just, yeah, well, okay. So anyway, let's get started. So I'm gonna share my screen here for a second. And okay. So Git for Visualizer projects, right? Versioning done the right way. Let's see what we can learn here. A little bit about me. I majored in computer engineering. I have 11 years of experience in the industry. I have 3 years working as a tech lead for Kony. I've been involved in helping shape the requirements for the App Factory product for the past year, and that has sparked my interest in terms of on the subject of CI as it applies to Kony projects, and that's why I've been doing so much research in this area. I would say I'm a CI evangelist at Kony, but I prefer the word ninja, although I will admit that I'm not as proficient yet as I would like to be. I'll try to be a bit humble today here. The objectives of this presentation are: we're going to explore some of the challenges of versioning Visualizer projects. I'm going to share with you some recommendations. Of course, none of this is mandatory. You can still version however you've been doing it so far. I'm just going to share the way that I do it, and I think it will make your lives easier if you follow these recommendations. I'm going to show you a couple of pretty cool techniques that you're probably not familiar with, and then we're going to leave some time for QA at the end. So the context. If you have been working with Visualizer for a while now, you'll understand that because it's a cross-platform tool, it has a very complex project structure, and it includes many different things inside of a single project. You will see things that come from Ant, Java, JavaScript, Cordova, tons of different tech stacks all bundled together into a single project, depending on what features of Visualizer you've been using. So that makes it very complex to understand the structure, and also very complex to understand what's happening under the hood when you start moving the pieces around, adding widgets and creating forms and so on. And another thing is Visualizer is meant to be a low-code tool, and it's actually an award-winning tool in that respect. But that also means that there are a lot of things that get created under the hood that you are not privy to. So unless you're having a look at the file system while you add a widget here or a form there, you probably are not aware of all the things that the Visualizer is doing for you in the background. And that makes it harder to version a project, particularly when it comes to running into merging conflicts. So we're going to have a look at a few of the things that cause a lot of the merging conflicts and how to get around them. And then the last thing, of course, it's constantly evolving. The structure of a project evolves from 5.6 to 6.5. There were major changes. Then again, for 7x, major changes. File form has changed. For 8x, a lot of things changed as well. Of course, all these changes are for the better, but you need to be able to understand the project structure if you're going to version effectively. So the challenge, how do we version a Visualizer project, right? And then what tool do we use? We know we need lots of power and flexibility, and also because there are so many things here that are not mainstream, it would be nice if the tool that we are going to use doesn't give us any additional headaches, right? So it should have wide adoption, a vibrant community, lots of documentation out in the web, right? So I hope some of you will find this funny. I thought it was, at least if you're a 90s kid, maybe you'll know who this guy is and why he's saying what he's saying. So let's get started. Before we dive into the hard stuff, I thought it would be nice to cover some of the basics. So if you, for instance, are not coming from a Git background, let's say that you're coming from SVN or CVS, we need to understand what Git is and it's not, right? Git is not SVN but distributed. You see a lot of people asking, what's the difference between Git and SVN in the web? And the answer is always simply, it's a distributed source code management system, and they stay at that, right? But it's not like, just that. There's a lot more to it than that. It's definitely not just like SVN or anything else, but with more stuff, It's not GitHub, it's not Bitbucket, or any other particular brand. Those are just companies that have branded Git and added a bunch of functionality, very cool functionality on top of Git, but in the end, it's not. That's not what the Git core is about, okay? And it's not just a desktop application with a pretty UI. So a lot of people will equate Git with GitHub or their GitHub desktop client. Some, Atlassian fans will equate it with source tree. It's not really that, okay? And in fact, we're not going to be using any of that today. What Git is. So, give me for a second. Okay, what Git is, it's a distributed source code management system that focuses on the contents of the files specifically. So it cannot be tricked by renaming a file. so that you will notice working with Git, if you change the name of a file, where other source control systems will say you've deleted one and created another, Git knows you've actually just modified a file, right? It's also very secure. It's secured by the SHA-1 algorithm. You'll notice every commit is identified by a SHA-1 hash, right? It's open source. It's an open source project. And it was developed in 2005 by Linus Torvalds, the father of Linux. So, and this, we all know this man can do no wrong. So, from a choosing a source code management tool perspective, I say it's the most solid option you can find out there in the market right now. Sorry. Okay. So the next question is, okay, so we're going to use Git out of the options out there for source code management. We're going to use Git. Then what should we use it with? Okay. There are a lot of GUI clients out there, and they're all some of them in the range from decent to extremely good. It's worth noting KPS, Kony Professional Services, recommends using SourceTree because it's significantly better than GitHub Desktop, even though GitHub Desktop seems to be far more popular or better well known, maybe because of the fame of the brand that backs it up. GitKraken is also an award-winning GUI client, and I would totally recommend it, if not for the fact that it's not free. You can use it for free for one account, but if you're going to use multiple accounts, then it's not. So KPS recommendation is to go with SourceTree in this respect. But still, all of these clients are aimed at making your life easier in terms of using Git without really learning Git. So to make it easier for you to do complex things and not have to work through the command line. But they also hide away a lot of the power that comes with Git. And contrary to what many people may believe, the Git command line is not dark magic. It can be learned, and it's very powerful, and you just need to take it a few steps at a time, okay? So that's what we're going to use today. Again, this doesn't mean that the things I'm going to show you are not compatible with your Git client of preference. I'm going to show you some things that you can do to tweak your Git repository, your Git, but you can, and you're going to definitely need the command line for that. But then after those are tweaked for every specific project, you can continue to work as you always have with your GUI client. Okay. So for now, let's go with full power. Okay. So the first thing that's worth noting is that with Visualizer 8.0, a new feature came out where you are able to link from the Visualizer UI, you're able to link into your source control tool, right? This was specifically meant to fire up Git GUI, which is a very basic UI client that you get when you install Git. But we're gonna go an extra step, and I'm going to show you how that can be that can make your life a lot better, and not just by using Git GUI. Okay, so our documentation specifically says just go to Window and click on version control. Fine, but if you do that, probably you're going to get the warnings that you see here that you have to edit your Git configuration and add an entry and so on. If you open the terminal and you type git GUI and you get a response saying GUI is not a Git command, then probably you need to first configure the Git GUI, right? Now, even if you follow that instruction there that says git config -- global and this bit here libexec, it could happen that when you click on version control, you're still going to get this error saying there's no such file or directory, right? If that happens, then it's because you actually need to first install Git or maybe because if you're using a Mac, then it came with an out-of-the-box Git version that doesn't include the Git GUI. Okay, so what you need to do is get yourself another installation of Git, and that can be done in a number of different ways depending on the platform. I've outlined 3 here. So for Windows, you can just download the installer. There's an installer for Mac. My preference is to install using Brew, and that's what I've used in my installation. There are ways to install Git on other operating systems, Debian distributions and using apt-get or yum. But since Visualizer cannot be installed on Linux, then we're not going to be covering that today. Okay, so then once you have, assuming you have already downloaded and installed, you need to have a look at your configuration or at your installation to find where the Git core is. Okay, so notice that the instructions, these instructions from Visualizer say user local git libexec, but that's just an example. It may not be your case. You need to look into your installation and find where that is in your machine. Because I used Brew, you can see that it's installed under Cellar, the Git, the version of Visualizer I'm using, and so on. So that's what I'm using to configure my Git installation. So what's going to happen after you've done this is you're going to be able to fire the Git GUI tool from Visualizer. And in order to do that, just to show you, well, I should have fired this before. Just a second. So just to get started, I've created a completely blank folder here, which is going to be my dummy workspace that we're going to be working with today. I'm going to open Visualizer to that location, and I'm going to show you how to make that work. So this is the command that I've shown you before on the slide. I'm just going to run this on the command line. Okay. So if I now show you, if you now look at your global Git configuration, which you can do by doing cat or more, or in my case, I'm going to be using Sublime for your global Git configuration file, you're going to see that I've added here this line, configuring the Git GUI. Okay. Now, the consequence of that, once Visualizer finishes firing up, is going to be that from Visualizer, we're going to be able to get this UI here. Just a second. Let's see if that's up. Okay. So this is the Git GUI. It's not very sophisticated. It's an okay tool if everything you have is the command line, but it's not as sophisticated as other tools that we have out there in the market. Okay, so and not especially not as sophisticated as SourceTree or Git Kraken. So the point is, this is fine, but we can do better, right? So let's see how we can do better. Actually, you can leverage this integration to fire your Git client of choice from Visualizer. And what you are going to do in order to do that is, well, provided that the Git client you're using can be fired from the command line, is you're going to find out what that command to fire up that application is, and you can configure it so that when Visualizer calls Git GUI, it actually fires up your Git client. This is you know, the Git GUI is okay, but this is far better. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how I can actually configure Git Kraken to do this for me. Okay. So if I look at the configuration now, I've added Git Kraken. I probably need to get rid of this. So I've added this line to the Git configuration by running that command. You don't really have to open up this file. I'm just showing you this if you're, in case you're not familiar with it, so that you'll know where to look if you're trying to do this and you run into trouble. Okay. So once this is done, let's just close Git GUI and try that once again. You can see now I'm firing up Git Kraken from my visualizer, from visualizer, right? And here didn't really open the project. Just give me a second. Let's create a new project. Okay? Let's create a custom app. Call it demo app. Okay. Okay. So here we are. Oh, sorry. It's not opening up in the directory where I have the project because I haven't yet initialized the Git repository in that location. So let's try that for a second. So where am I standing? CD from here, CD to workspace, CD to oh, right, okay. Yeah. This is not where I meant to be. Sorry, apologies for this. To be my demo workspace. Yeah, this is not where I'm supposed to be. Okay, so to demo app. Right. Great. Okay, so I'm going to initialize the Git repository here. You can do that with source tree or any other Git client of your choice. But here's the key: so long as you have initialized an empty Git repository at least, then now it should work. Okay. Right. And you can see now I have been able to open Git Kraken from Visualizer into the repository or into the root of the Visualizer project that I'm working on. You can do this with source tree just as fine, or any other client that can be started from the command line. So, but since I'm not going to be working with the command line today, I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to find myself in my cheat sheet here to configure this to work instead with the terminal. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is click here, and you can see I'm already at the location of my visualizer project. Okay, so that's fine. So that's great. Now we can use. We found out that we can actually fire our Git client of choice from visualizer. So now we can get started, right? Before we dive into additional details, there are a few do's and don'ts that I thought would be nice to go over. First one, I see a lot of bad practices, like people versioning entire workspaces, or putting their visualizer projects inside a subfolder of their Git repo. Notice that here, notice that in this example, I initialized it. If I do this, you'll see that I've initialized my Git repository at the very root of the visualizer project. They're both the same path. Okay, this is the best practice. This is the best that you can do. A lot of people will try to version the parent folder, so the workspace folder. And I know if you're coming from other technology stacks, this will seem like a silly thing. You know, why would you version a folder above? Or why would you just place the app inside another folder and version that? It's not something you would do if you were working with Android or Xcode or any other technology stack. So why do it with a visualizer, right? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. So that's one thing. Then the other thing is you have to commit very often, right? And when I say very bold and underscore, I say it because it's something that, you know, through in any article about Git, you're going to see you should commit often. Right, fine, but with a low-code tool like Visualizer, it should be very often. Like, and the reason is that all of this automatically generated code that Visualizer generates under the hood that you don't see until you go and do a Git status or a Git diff, that's going to cause some major headaches for you unless you keep track of what is it that's being generated. So even if you're not going to commit every little change that you do, you should at least, you know, very often, very frequently, have a look at what your Git status looks like, because that's when you're going to see, okay, so I added a widget. What does that do? And then when you go to the Git status, you see that 2 or 3 or 5 files have been changed, and you only did one little change. So it's better if you keep track of what is it that's being done under the hood, and you do small commits. The smaller the commits, the better, in order to keep sane, right? So that you can then break apart and go forth and back in your history of the repository as you see fit without running into too much issues. Then also you need to familiarize yourself with the anatomy of the project. If you have never had a look at what the Visualizer project looks like from the file system, you should go, you should know that there is a themes folder, that for each theme there is a subfolder in there with that name. You should know that there is a forms folder, that there is a modules folder. You should know how those things are actually stored so that when you run into merging conflicts, you're able to say, okay, yes, this file of course is a form, this file is an image, this file over there is a skin. Okay, so have a look at what that looks like. I would suggest what I've done is I also leverage Sublime, but you can use other text editors that allow you to open an entire folder and see the structure. You can do it from Visualizer as well, if you change perspectives to Java or Eclipse perspective. I don't do it because I use Visualizer for my Visualizer development, and I don't like to have to switch perspectives all the time. Okay. Then commit only what you need to change. So if you move a widget from here to there, or add a skin or something like that, and you see 12 files being changed, something is wrong. You're not ignoring all the things that you should be, or you're adding more to the project than you think you are, or maybe you did a change before and you didn't realize that you were adding a ton of stuff, and now you're actually mixing changes with each other. So pay a lot of attention to what it is that you're going to commit. Then, of course, as a best practice, always commit with a description that describes clearly what your changes are in a meaningful way. So add a floating button to add a new record, or add an image for an avatar. Those are things that make sense. Don't just commit with a message that says some changes, right? That's a very bad practice, and you're not going to be able to track your history appropriately. And then if you have CI, I would recommend you need to build on push, right? A lot of times we ignore files that are important, or we make changes that are not compatible. If you don't build on push with a large team, it's going to be hard to see why or when the project broke. And for that, the absolute recommendation is to go with App Factory. So don'ts. Do not version the entire workspace. Do not place your project in a subfolder. Do not version everything. You need to version only things that matter. Do not version your project in a zip file. I know it's going to seem silly to say this, but I've seen it a lot. A lot of people zip their projects, put them, and then push them into source control. That doesn't make sense at all, because then you can't tell the differences between one version of the project and the next. Do not place more than one project in the same repo. Also, I've seen a lot. Doesn't make sense, because then if they are projects by different teams, you're going to end up into merging conflicts between across teams, which absolutely doesn't make sense. It makes your life more complicated. Again, the commit messages should be meaningful, and don't commit stuff you don't recognize. And we're gonna look into what I mean by that. So let's start a new project. Okay, I'm going to create a new project called demo app, and I'm going to push it to a repository called demo-app. Okay. I'm going to set the bundle package to com.kony.demoapp, and we're going to see what that does to the repository. So to get started on that, I'm going to create a project. I'm using GitHub here. You're free to use Bitbucket or whatever you like, of course. I'm going to call it demo app. It's just going to be an empty repo. I've already initialized the repository, right? So if I go here, you can already see I have a bunch of stuff, a whole lot of stuff that I can commit. Okay. So then I could just add all of this, but let's wait for a second. Or yeah, let's just add it. Because let's say that we don't know any better. So I'm just going to add everything, and I'm going to commit it. Okay, and I'm going to say create project. Okay. Okay, fine. Now, now I'm going to try and check out this project from another user. Okay, I'm going to pretend to be Paul, and I'm going to check out this project. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder here. I'm going to call it Paul, because this is theoretically in Paul's machine. I'm going to switch the workspace. And did I push? I didn't push. So push to this repo. Setting the remote and then pushing. Okay, so fine. So the original structure is now in source control, right? Now, Paul comes along, he joins the project, he's going to try and clone this repository and start doing some changes of his own. So he copies the Git URL and going to switch to Paul's workspace, right? So now we're wearing Paul's tag, okay? And I'm going to git clone this repo. First thing that you need to make sure is that you clone into a folder that abides by the naming conventions required by Visualizer. If I just do this, and while that is cloning, I'm going to open up Visualizer into Paul's workspace. If I just do that, then the clone is going to create a folder called demo-app. Okay. Visualizer does not like project names that have dashes in them. Okay. I think it has to be an alphanumeric starting by an alpha, and it cannot be less than 7 characters long, and I think not longer than 13, if I'm not mistaken. So if I try to open this project like it is, I'm going to run into issues. So while Visualizer starts, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clone it again, and now I'm going to clone it into demo app. Okay. And if we have a look, we can see that now I've cloned it into demo app and demo app. Okay. Fine. So give Visualizer a second. Finish starting. Okay. So now I'm going to try and open the first one I cloned, right? Demo app. And you're going to see, it failed to open the project. It's an invalid name. It should only have alphabets and digits, and so on. Okay, so that's the first thing you need to watch out for. Let's delete that. Now let's open demo app. Okay, so it didn't have any forms. It didn't have much in it. The first thing is you need to, let's say that I just go back here and say git status. Okay, so there's, sorry. Okay, so I just opened the project. I didn't do anything else, and all of a sudden I see a change in the project properties file. What is this? I just opened the project, didn't do anything. Why is it changed, right? So you're going to see that Visualizer, again, because it's a low-code tool, tends to update a lot of files very frequently. And if you are not careful, you are going to clutter your project with commits of things that are not really important. A lot of the changes that are made to these files are, of course, important and part of your project, but then there are a few here and there which are not that relevant, and they cause merge conflicts with very, very often. Okay, so to give you an example, you can see that just by, you will have seen this before, just by doing a small save, or I haven't even set the package or the bundle ID for the app, you're going to see that a lot of these files get created. App settings, context.properties. A lot of these files get updated just with timestamps to say when was the last time that the app was updated, and so on. Okay. And this, again, if you're trying to make small commits and control what you're changing and avoid merge conflicts, this is just going to drive you nuts. It's going to create a lot of noise, and it's going to make it more difficult for you to track what changes to your project are are legitimate changes, right? So in order to avoid those issues, we need a Git Ignore. Like with any other technology stack, we need a Git Ignore. Okay. Now, if some of you are wondering why we need a Git Ignore, then I would suggest just look up Git Ignore on the web. You're going to see it has a ton of advantages to it when you're versioning. Every versioning tool out there has, I mean, not just Git, like SVN or Mercurial, they have equivalents of mechanisms to ignore some files. And the reason is, if you don't do that, then all of your compiled files, everything that's automatically generated, all of that stuff is going to clutter your project. It's not going to let you focus on what really matters. It's not going to, you're going to see a lot of people doing commits where 20 or 30 different files are updated, and it's impossible to tell whether all of that is actually relevant. And it's probably not. This is probably just junk because you're not using a Git Ignore that allows you to keep your repository clean. So in order to get one, I do have a very small toy project where I try to keep track with the evolution of Visualizer, and I try to develop a Git Ignore that works for me. And you're very welcome to try it. So this is what we're going to be, this is what we're going to be doing or using today. I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to type it here. I'm going to use curl to download the Git Ignore file. Okay. Oh, sorry. By the way, it's just to give you an example so that you see it live. I'm not going to save anything. I'm just going to open this and finish and save. Okay. So yeah, Git status. There, you see? So I didn't do anything. I just opened the settings. I saved. I have a bunch of stuff that has been changed with timestamps to say when was the last time that I saved, what version of Visualizer I'm using, and so on and so forth. So to avoid this, I'm going to download this Git Ignore file, right? And to have a look at what that Git Ignore file has. You can see that there's a lot included in this Git Ignore file. I've been tracking this for a very long time. To give you a very, it's self-documented, but to give you an overview, anything inside the JS source directory that's automatically generated JavaScript that's already either linked or concatenated or minified by Visualizer. So you don't need to version that. I've also added this line here to specifically say whatever is inside custom leaves JSSR, that one does need to be versioned because it normally contains code for your FFIs. Then the and contrib jar used to be a problem. I don't like pushing jars or zip files into source control, and so I've always wanted to ignore it. Thankfully, with Visualizer 8.x, now we can. With Visualizer 7, we had issues because if you ignored it, then your project would break. Visualizer was not able to replace it, but now it is. So happy times. This is great. Now the APK and the .car files that get generated by Visualizer. So the APK, of course, for the Android apps, and the car file for iOS, the Kony archive for building Xcode, right? Then the resources custom libs folder contains a bunch of bundled FFI that comes out of the box with Visualizer for things like logging or sync, that sort of thing. Again, those are either zip files or jars. I don't like pushing them to source control, so I ignore them. But then, in order for the project not to break, you also need to ignore the SDK plugins properties file. Okay, when Visualizer opens a project and sees that this file is missing, it regenerates all of that FFI for you. Okay, so that's important. It's important to understand that these two things go in tandem. Then there are a lot of files that are metadata that are not relevant. The headless properties file, I never version it. Some people like to, but if you do, you have to consider that you may be storing passwords in that file, and it's not a good practice to place passwords in source control. So I'm going to show you in a bit a filter to avoid pushing secrets into this file. Okay, these are so before we spoke about FFI, now about NFI, native feature interface. You can also ignore these files here. There's absolutely no problem. When native API is not present, then all of these files are regenerated for you. Of course, it goes without saying, if you are adding your own FFI to the project, you cannot version that. And that's why I'm not just ignoring everything here. I'm being very specific about what I am putting in this Git Ignore file. Okay. Widget IDs. So if you're exposing widget IDs for debugging, these files get generated. If you're using Cordova, you'll get a node modules folder, a Cordova temp folder. All of these things can be ignored. And in a normal standalone Cordova project, you would be able to ignore all of this. So therefore, you can ignore it here, and it's safe. Then also for I18s, you will get some files generated here. Those are not necessary. You don't need to version those as well. If you build from the command line, you get this file generated. This is just log. No need to version that as well. FFI, we already went over this. In JSSR, if you're doing FFI, you're going to get the bindings placed under custom libs JSSR, and you cannot ignore that, or that will break your project. But the FFI that does come out of the box with Visualizer, you can safely ignore that. Okay, and all of this is just that, FFI code, and then at the end you have a few again metadata files that Visualizer can perfectly regenerate without any additional intervention. So you can ignore those and avoid the hassle of trying to figure out why you have merge conflicts in those files. So if now that I've added this Git Ignore file, if I do a git status, you'll see that the changes to my project are fewer. This is actually sane. I can actually have a look and see. Okay, so what is it that's happening here? Why is this changed? If I have a look at these files, at the changes in these files now, then I'm going to see that there's still a little bit of metadata that gets modified inside of these files, and this can still cause a few merge conflicts. So we're going to have a look at how we can avoid those as well. This is very important. The empty direct, I call this the empty directory problem. We know that, or if you don't know, notice that Git is a system that is very good at versioning content, right? So it focuses on the contents of the files. A directory has no content. It's not really a file. So Git does not version directories. If you place an empty directory into your working tree, it will not be pushed into source control unless you add content to it, i.e., unless you add files into it, right? The challenge with that is that Visualizer sometimes will fail if certain directories are missing. So one worth noting is resources custom libs. If this directory does not exist in your project, the Visualizer won't be able to build. Okay. So when we are versioning our project and we are already ignoring, if you use that Git Ignore file that I showed you, you're going to be ignoring a lot of the things that go into that folder. So probably custom libs is not going to be pushed to source control. To avoid that, the workaround is to put a dummy file inside the directory in order to force it to go to source control. And you can imagine, of course, the scenarios where this is relevant is you know, if I push the source control and I don't push this folder, the moment that Paul checks it out and tries to build it, it's going to fail. Okay? Or if your continuous integration system, your engine, checks out the project, the App Factory, for instance, checks out the project and tries to build, it's going to fail because it cannot find this folder. So to get around this, just the convention or what I recommend is you, instead of creating a Git Ignore file, which a lot of people recommend, it makes more sense for me to create a Git keep, so that I know this file doesn't really have anything, it's not really outlining anything I need to ignore. It's exactly doing the opposite. It's helping me force a directory into source control. Okay. So we were looking at project settings, right? If Paul I was wearing Paul's hat, and I just cloned the repository, and I just saved without making any changes, right? So one of the things that you could see from the screenshot to the right is that maybe the file was prettified and now it gets minified, or exactly the opposite. It goes from being minified to being prettified, and that doesn't really let you see what the actual changes to the contents are, or if there are any, right? Now, even on the screenshot below, you will see what I just showed you. Some values get updated very often, and it's not really relevant to your project. This is just information that Visualizer uses to work, okay, with the project. So we need, and then the other problem that you're going to see is, at least with forms and images, I haven't seen this happen with other widgets yet. Maybe the more advanced widgets will have similar issues. Is in Visualizer, there's we have the concept of the channel perspective, right? So if you go to Visualizer and you create a form, let's create a little form here and say add this button here, and I'm going to call my form, let's say that this is a home form, okay? Some people like prefixes. I like suffixes, so I call everything something, capital F form, right? And then for the button, I'm going to call this, I don't know, login button, okay? Okay, so doing this change, looking at this form, you can see how that form is presented in native web or in Android web, how it shows on an iOS native device, or on what specific device it shows, right? What that is going to do is that it's going to add metadata to the form file, and it's going to show you, and you're going to see stuff like this, okay? You're going to see on the screenshot on the left, you can see that I was looking at it on an iPhone X, and then I switched to a Galaxy S8 Plus, and the platform went from being an iPhone to being an iPhone. And the previous device that I was looking at was an iPhone X, and so on. So, and you can see the shell SSS. So this is the way that Visualizer is rendering that little frame around the form, right? And then on images, something similar happens. You can see in the screenshot on the right, I've moved the image around, which is a legitimate change. I moved it down to the left. Yes, I moved it down to the left. But also you can see at the bottom there is a change that says platform. I was looking at it on iPhone, and then I switched to SPA Android native, right? Now, this type of thing, even if you don't do if you don't make any changes to your form, this can also result in merging conflicts, right? And you don't want to be annoyed by, even though this, if you're familiar with the project structure, this may be simple to fix. You don't want to be constantly annoyed by this type of little change that is not really significant, okay? So in order to get around that, so of course the problem with something like this is we've already seen the Git Ignore as a way to ignore entire files. Okay, so either a file is important or it's not. But in this case, both of these files are important because they are a form and an image of your project. It's just that there are certain parts of the file that you're not really interested in. So how do we get around that? Now, in Git, there's something called filters. Okay, if you look it up, you're gonna see very complex explanations on what a filter is. But in a nutshell, a filter is just an attribute of a file or of a number of files that points to two commands, which you can customize. A clean command, which is run when files are staged, or so when you're preparing a commit, and a smudge command, which is run when you check out a file from source control. We're not going to bother about the smudge command. It's not relevant to what we're going to do for the time being. We're going to focus on the clean command. So when I have been working on my project, I want to push certain changes into source control, but not all of them. So that's just when files are staged. Okay. And then we're also going to use something called JQ, which is our command line tool, which is like said, if you're familiar with the Nix command line, the stream editing command said allows you to edit text files, but it's very difficult to use it to manipulate JSON files, which are well, basically every form, every widget in a visualizer project is a JSON file. So instead of trying to use sed for that, we're going to be using JQ. And then you can see this image, you can see like I said, smudge runs on the way down, right, from the server to your machine, and clean works on the way, let's say, on the way up, so from your working tree as you stage, and then into source control. So the way we get around these issues with the project properties file, with the forms and whatnot, is we're going to define these filters for these files. For the project properties JSON, you can see here I've created a filter called Kony project properties. Okay, and for the forms, for anything that matches a form, I spoke about suffixes versus prefixes. This will depend which one of these three lines you use, depends on which naming convention you use. But of course, you can name them all. You can use all of them, and that works fine. So maybe one of your colleagues uses one convention and you use another. Not really good for the project, but it's not really an obstacle here. And then for images as well, anything with an image suffix or an ing suffix or an ing prefix is going to be, you're going to apply the filter called Kony images for those files. Okay, and then for the headless build-out properties file, if you're going to version it, then you can also apply a filter for that as well. And I'm going to show you what those filters should look like. So the point here is, the way you do this is we've defined that those files need those filters, and now we're going to define what those filters link into. There's a command called Git Config, right? And if you do this on the global Git configuration, then you will only have to do this once for all of your projects. Okay. And what I'm going to do, you can just copy and paste all of this, right, and run it in the command line, and Git will configure these filters for you. And then the only other thing that you need to do is you have to either create a Git attributes file in your repo, or go to .git info attributes. So if you're not familiar with that, I'll show you in a second. So when you initialize a project, actually I'm I'm not going to be able to see that unless it's from the command line. You will see that there's a .git folder created. This is where Git creates its lightweight database to start tracking your project. Inside of that, you will find this file, the Git info attributes file, and you can add these lines to that. Okay, or you can just create a Git attributes. You can just create a Git attribute file here in the root of a project. File, sorry, and then save it as Git attributes. Okay, now we have our Git attributes file here, and this is what's saying apply these filters to these files. Okay, now we have to define those filters. You can just go here and copy and paste this, but I've already run those commands. So in my case, all I need to really do to make sure that they are there, you can do this on your own if you want to make sure that they're still there, and that you haven't removed them, is have a look at your global Git configuration. So that will be in the root of your user, Git, and it's going to be called Git Config. Okay, and you can see here at the end, I've added these 4 filters. Okay, you don't really need to type anything in here. These are fairly complex commands. You can just copy and paste or run this script in your command line. And you can see here that the command is actually saying for the project properties file, run JQ, right, which is this tool that I told you about that helps you edit the streams and JSON streams, right, and apply all of these filters, meaning ignore all of these attributes in the file. Okay, and then for the forms, ignore anything that says .device or previous device or platform or previous platform or shell CSS. And for images, ignore anything that says context.platform. This is JSON, so you have to imagine you're actually, well, you can imagine what I'm doing here is I'm traversing these properties and saying which properties don't matter. Okay, and then for the last one, for the headless properties file, I'm actually using sed, and I'm just saying, ignore anything that has the password word in it. You can do it for other attributes as well, but in general, I recommend not versioning the headless build.properties file. So maybe you don't even need that. Okay. Now to show you how that works, let's say that now yeah. Okay. So I added those properties here. I'm going to remove these filters from the global configuration. And you can see here, for instance, native container properties has been modified. Native container properties has been modified. What else? This is the project properties file. And so, well, this is the project prop XML file. So we can now apply a filter for that as well, but I haven't in this location yet. So, sorry. Just put them back. So you can see the file has changed. Now I can see that the file has changed, but I don't see, sorry, something went wrong. So let me check, go back to, probably because I have not saved here. I'm going to close this session, open it again on the original project. Sorry, how are we doing with time? Not really been keeping track.
Hi, Miguel. We're 10 after 9, so we've gone a little bit over, but I've let everybody know that we're recording this, so if people do have to move on, they can do so.
Okay, okay. So maybe I just need to, okay, so maybe I just need to move a little bit faster. Not try to show so much detail. Okay, so we're nearly done. The point is you can now actually ignore certain, by using filters, you can ignore certain parts of certain files, and therefore you can dial down the noise that you get when you're trying to add changes into your project. Then, since we're over, let's jump into aliases. This is a very useful thing you can use in order to make your life easier. Git aliases are customizable commands that can help you save time. Sometimes the Git command line can get very complex, and you may need to use a lot of different flags, different options. So in order to save time, we're gonna do a couple of aliases here, and you can look this up. I've linked the documentation here. It's a really useful, very powerful thing to use. I recommend you have a look. So just notice that we have already defined one alias already. When we linked Visualizer into the Git GUI or source tree or Git Kraken or terminal, we were actually defining an alias for GUI, the GUI alias, okay? But you can define other ones. You can find others. So for instance, I like this one, the mute command. If you're working on stuff and then you have other changes pending, and maybe you can stash them, and you definitely should look into stashing. But if you just don't want to see that noise crowding up your screen, you can actually mute that temporarily. So assume that those files are not changed, and then unmute them when you're done with whatever piece of work you're doing. And then the other one that's very useful, especially if you're talking to Kony support, is sometimes when let's say that you have issues with your project, it's not building, or some feature is not working correctly, they will ask you for an upload of your project, right? And you will notice if you just try to zip the entire directory, that is going to be major. It's going to be probably hundreds of megabytes, okay? And it won't ever fit an email. You're probably not going to be able to upload it. They're going to give you an FTP link, so it's going to get cumbersome, okay? So in order to get around that, we can use a combination of two Git commands. One of them is the git clean command, which actually helps you remove any files from the repo that are ignored, which is very useful, because if you just git clean, then what's left in the repo is actually what matters. Okay, everything else, everything that's automatically generated, everything that's let's say metadata or junk or just crowds up your file system is removed, and now you can zip. Okay, but maybe if you're using Git, then there's also a .git file, .git directory in that path that is very, very large, because it contains a copy of your entire repository. So instead of just zipping it up with zip, what you need to do is use Git archive, and it will archive anything inside the repo except the parts that are Git, so the .git directory. And you can, even though you can see it's a fairly long command, what you can do is you can create an alias for it, say alias zip, and then now just if somebody asks you for a zipped version of your project, all you have to do is type git zip and give it a name for the file, and that will be it. So to give you an example, if just show you how this works, if I wanted, let's say that I wanted to zip this project, I could do git zip and give it a name, demo.zip, and it creates this file, and you can see it's only 11 megabytes. Okay, even though if you look into the project structure, you're going to find that there are zips and jars and a whole lot of stuff that if you add all of that up, probably you're going to get a much larger file. If you just add, zip everything here, then that is 21 megabytes. Okay, 21 megabytes, and I just created a completely viable zipped version of my project of only 11 megabytes. Okay, so that's about, I think that's about it. Now, just that was the last of the last of the tricks I had up my sleeve. Major takeaways, best practices, or things you should definitely do. Link Visualizer to your Git client of choice, whether that's source tree or the command line or anything anything else. Use an appropriate Git Ignore file. Again, this continues to evolve, so it depends on what version of Visualizer you're using. Don't forget important directories behind. So like I showed you the resources custom libs directory that needs to be pushed in source control. Commit very often and only what you recognize. So things that are prone to error, for instance, if you create a theme and you add a skin to that theme, and you do a git status or git diff, you're going to see that the new theme, the new skin that you created actually gets replicated into every theme that you had, right? And you may think wrong. You may be, if you think you can just push the one for the theme that you are working with, you would be wrong. You're going to break your project. You're going to get a build error that says something like, the number of skins across themes does not match. Okay, so the more you play with the command line, the more you do your git diff and your git status, the more you're going to understand how the project structure works and how to avoid that kind of thing. Filter out noise. I showed you filters, how to use them, and then use aliases, how to make your life a bit easier when it comes to these things. Last but not least, I want to thank all the people that have helped me put together this webinar. It's the first time I host a webinar, so I have a lot to be. I was very nervous, but I got I had awesome support by all of these people. Paul for helping me with the Q&A today, Marian Tamai for arranging this, Piyush Devani from our product team, from our Visualizer product team, for helping me uncover how Visualizer works and gather all of this information for you, and Matt Trevathan, our VP for the App Factory product, because you can imagine testing, what files can I remove, can I ignore, and without breaking a build would have been an eternal piece of work, if not for being able to use a continuous integration system. So that's it from my side. I think we can move to Q&A now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Miguel. That was a great session. I'm sure the audience today must have learned a lot of cool things from your session. Yes, we do have a few questions there in the Q&A panel, so we'll answer those. And just to let everyone know that if you still have questions, you can still put it up in the Q&A panel. We are still here for a couple more minutes. If you don't have any questions right now, you can maybe later go to basecamp.kony.com and put it up there in the forum, in forums, and then ask the experts there. After the session, we'll definitely be putting this recording file in the article section, so you can go to the same article and then see the recording as well as the polls that we have done. You will see all of these things there.
Paul, did we have any questions that we want to pass to Miguel?
Hi, yes. First of all, everybody, thank you very much for the good questions. I hope I was able to answer most of them. We'll be getting some specific questions around the Git perspective, which you can use if you installed the Git plugin. So I made some few tests on this, but Miguel, maybe you have played with this a little bit and can give some additional insights. That would be the first one. And then there are also some specific issues which are raised after using Git pull. So Miguel, if you can have a look at the Q&A window and have a look at the last question. And also tell me if you have experience with the Git perspective in Visualizer. Please go ahead.
Yes, let me have a look. So with the Git perspective, are we referring to the Git perspective? So the Eclipse Git perspective?
Yes, exactly.
I actually haven't played around with that. I don't really know how it behaves. I'm not sure. I would only say, with regards to that historically, the Eclipse integrations with other tools or plugins are sometimes a bit jumpy, and I don't really think that maybe with the sole exception of well. I would say I don't think that any Git client can do, any Git plugin for an IDE can do as much of a good job as a pure Git client will. But that's just my humble opinion. So I would definitely recommend, linking this to source tree or something else.
I totally agree. Okay, that takes us to the next question, which was the issue which Fayaz mentioned, issues after Git pull where the workspace is not refreshed until you refresh the IDE, and that there are apparently some files which are being overridden. So I think this might be related to you are updating your project folder through your Git client or command line. And at the same time, you have your project open in Visualizer and do some additional changes. So there might obviously some conflicts which are going to arise from there. So do you have any recommendations on how to handle updates which you're pulling from your colleagues from the remote?
Yeah. Okay. So if you are, let's say that Paul and I are working on a project, he makes a change, I pull that, and I start working on another feature, right? And then in the meantime, Paul makes another commit and pushes that to source control. If I want to pull Paul's changes onto my working tree or my working directory, I'm going to have. It could happen that there are no conflicts, but probably there will be. You need to either do a merge or do a rebase. Okay. And I am very sorry to say this, that the only way you're going to be able to get that reflected in Visualizer is if you refresh the project. Yes, you have to go to I think it was file file refresh to load those changes back in. I don't think there's we could look into working with the product team to see whether it's possible to maybe fix that, but I haven't found a better way of doing that. And with regards to having merging conflicts, it's not really a Visualizer issue. It's something that comes with versioning in itself. You either pull and get conflicts and you need to that you then need to solve using a text editor, or I think source tree gives you a feature to try and sort out conflicts. I'm not entirely sure. I use a text editor for it. It's not very difficult once you understand the structure of the actual file. So if you're having an issue with a conflict with a form or a conflict with an image widget, and you understand those structures, those JSON files, then it's not difficult to understand what's happening and to fix it. But then one way you can try to avoid that is, again, in that scenario that I painted, I would try to do a rebase. So if my work is supposed to be based on the latest changes by Paul, then I should not do a git pull to get his latest changes. I should just do a rebase to try and replay my changes on top of his latest changes. That will avoid the merge conflicts, because of course merge conflicts are a result of me saying I have made these changes on top of version A, and then trying to replay changes from a later version that do not match well in time. But if I just rebase, then it's as if I had started my work after Paul had done his latest changes. So that avoids the merging conflict, and that would be my first recommendation in that regard.
Another question we have is the source tree app. So if you want to link the source tree app as your GUI to version control in Visualizer 8, do you have to install a source tree client, a command line interface, or is it enough if you just install a client which you can download from source tree app? Source tree app website.
It should be enough to just install SourceTree. The test that you can do is, once you have installed SourceTree, just type SourceTree into a terminal, and if it fires up SourceTree, then it's correctly linked, and you only need to configure the alias. If that does not fire SourceTree, then there's something wrong with your installation, and you need to somehow put the SourceTree executable in the path for your machine.
Yeah, I think that's it. We don't have any more questions here.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. I really appreciate the high attendance, and I hope the session was not too dense. I know it's hard stuff, but I trust that if you apply these few tips and tricks to your projects, it will make your life better. So, and that's the aim.
Yep. Thanks, Miguel. Thanks, Paul, for taking all the questions. So as I said, you can still go to basecamp.kony.com if you have more questions. We are there and we'll help you and answer those questions. So the next webinar, if you see the slide, we have it on Kony Offline Sync. It will be on May 16th. You can go to articles and check more details about this session. You can also go to homepage and click on events and see what all webcasts we have scheduled, so you can sign up there and register for the upcoming webinars. So we don't have any more questions right now, so let's close the session. Thanks everybody once again, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.